Video games, especially those in the adventure game genre, are supposed to be fun, but what if they were more serious or even depressing, rather than lighthearted or colourful? Well, one game that dared to stand out, not just in its genre, but also from its predecessors, is the PC game Zork Nemesis. The Zork games are a series of adventure games that have text instead of graphics, describing the situation and allowing the player to type in actions in order to progress. The series eventually transitioned to having graphics in the 1993 game Return to Zork. If there were two aspects that were consistent across most of these games, it was either the relatively annoying puzzles and mazes, or the light-hearted and even goofy fantasy setting. Released in 1996, Zork Nemesis does away with these things for the most part. This may annoy, confuse, or upset people who are familiar with the Zork games, but for an adventure game, Zork Nemesis is more than exceptional. A sequel to Return to Zork, and not a direct continuation of its story, Zork Nemesis features the player as a nameless adventurer investigating a dangerous corner of the world of Zork known as the Forbidden Lands, in the hopes of finding 4 alchemists who were last seen heading there and were never heard from again. It is soon discovered that a mysterious curse has emerged and that a dangerous being known as Nemesis has imprisoned the 4 alchemists in a temple.
Bring fire, my element. You're in danger. Hurry!
The alchemist's requests and warnings about the Nemesis are only the beginning of an epic adventure involving love, greed, depression, redemption, deceit, and alchemy. The story is certainly compelling and mostly delivered in a non-linear way. There is a lot of backstory told through books, notes, and photos. A few of these help in solving puzzles, as well as full motion video cutscenes that are usually activated by clicking on certain objects. It is mostly unclear if these scenes occur due to the objects being haunted in a ghostly way, but at least the cutscenes are well written, acted, and directed for the most part.
And your name will be blessed for bringing this child to the great empire. It's time.
Shame the cutscenes are plagued by the blurry interlaced problems that were common in a lot of adventure games at the time. The game is almost worth playing for a second time to make more sense of the multi-layered storyline. The budget for this game was fairly high, and the production values certainly showcase this. In a similar fashion to other adventure games released close to 1996, especially Myst, the player can move the on-screen cursor with their mouse to the left or right to pan 360 degrees. Then you can move the cursor around to interact with the world, such as using an object, moving around, or zooming in/out. This aspect of exploration takes a few minutes to get used to, and it can be a little hard to tell where you can move, but it works so well. The fact that you are given this much exploration makes for such a detailed world, partly due to the art direction and effects. There's nothing flat, and the details are rich. The only problem is that there is a fair amount of pixelation, especially when panning, and the graphics are at their best when zooming in on what are pre-rendered stills. The graphics are nice, but are definitely not on par with the sound. The atmosphere is suitably eerie, which suits the dark tone of the game. The music, composed by Mark Morgan, makes for a haunting ambience. Add to that sharp and sometimes chilling sound effects, including but not limited to wind, bells, big doors opening and closing, and a recurring spell casting noise. And you've got what is probably the best thing about Zork Nemesis. The gameplay does very well to stand up to the production values, so it's not a style over substance approach. Not only do you explore the aforementioned temple, but also the homes of the alchemists, which include a monastery, an asylum, a castle, and a conservatory. All 5 of these places are fairly big and contain several puzzles to tax your brain. The majority of these are the most mature interesting and logical in the Zork series. You'll be figuring out how to get through doors and utilizing magic and machines, usually for the practice of alchemy and more. There are even a few musical puzzles, which thankfully don't require knowledge of musical theory, though it's a bonus if you do. Some of these puzzles are frustratingly hard, especially in the castle, but that is mostly due to the fact that you have to be patient when exploring the worlds, because there are many clues to puzzles that may not necessarily be obvious until you come across the actual puzzle, even with the help of a paper and pen on your desk. Some puzzles also require trial and error, but thankfully the probability of dying is much lower than previous Zork games. You should still save your game often though. Above all, the gameplay is more than exceptional, although not perfect. So what else is wrong with the game? Well, it may be subjective and down to preference. Zork fans may only be able to tolerate so much as a passing reference to Grooves, flood control dams, and Lord Flathead. On top of that, the game may be too dark or depressing for some. There aren't many people to talk to in the game, which may potentially lead to a sense of isolation or loneliness. There are even a few gruesome moments which aren't graphic but are heavily implied. Plus, the third act of the game that occurs after completing the crux of the game and observing a major plot point is a little lame. It also would have been nice to have subtitles outside of an obscure patch on the internet. On top of all this, the game is prone to crash when swapping discs, which occurs when travelling to each of the 5 worlds. However, that is thankfully rectified in the digital DRM-free GOG release, which is probably the version to get, especially for a modern computer. Zork Nemesis may be one of the best, if not the best, adventure games I've ever played, even in the Zork series. I appreciate how this game is part of that series, but even if it was essentially a different setting or backstory, this is still a great adventure game in its own right. For those of you who are fairly patient, when looking for clues that is, and want to be an adventurer exploring a compelling world, then Zork Nemesis, with its graphics, sound, puzzles and story, will hook you, especially if you decide to turn off the lights and turn up the volume.